The Vorak Empire stretched across 3 galaxies, a vast dominion built on a simple principle: strength conquers all. Their reptilian physiology, scaled hides resistant to most conventional weapons, regenerative capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, and musculature dense enough to punch through reinforced titanium, had established them as the undisputed apex predators of known space. They were, by every objective measure, the perfect killing machines. Humanity, designated as a Tier 7 species on the Galactic Combat Index, presented no military threat to the Voratian hegemony. The assessment was humiliating but accurate. Humans lacked the natural armor, sensory advantages, or raw strength to compete with the dominant species. But what humans lacked in brute force, they compensated for with adaptability and specialized knowledge. The Vorak, recognizing these traits, had assigned humans the role of livestock managers across their territories, positions that utilized human intellect without granting any meaningful authority. Dr. Elena Vasquez had accepted her assignment to Kepler 42b with cautious optimism. The xenobiologist viewed her 3-year contract as an opportunity rather than a sentence, a chance to study truly alien life forms while maintaining the facade of the compliant colonial administrator. Colony 23, Delta, housed approximately 50,000 humans, most engaged in the husbandry of 6-legged thorax beasts that produced a protein-rich secretion highly valued throughout Voratian territories. Elena's official responsibilities involved maximizing thorax production efficiency, but she had negotiated for research time in her contract. 2 days each week, she was permitted to venture into the designated safe zones of Kepler's wilderness to catalog indigenous species. The Vorak commanders had approved this arrangement with dismissive indifference. Human curiosity was a harmless quirk, provided it didn't interfere with productivity quotas. Today marked Elena's 17th expedition. She had pushed her permissions to their limits, venturing slightly beyond the established safety perimeter into a region locals called the Crimson Flats, named for the ruddy soil that crunched beneath her boots. Her collection case already contained several promising specimens: a luminescent fungal network that responded to sound vibrations, and a 6-winged arthropod with peculiar crystalline formations growing from its exoskeleton. Field Journal. Entry 42, Elena spoke into her wrist recorder. The biodiversity gradient increases sharply beyond the administrative boundary. Possible explanations include decreased human activity or changes in soil mineral content. The crystalline ridge beetles appear to... A thunderous roar split the air, so powerful that Elena felt it reverberate through her chest cavity. She instinctively dropped to a crouch, scanning the horizon. The sound was unmistakable, a Vorak war cry. But something about it seemed wrong. The vocalization lacked the usual controlled precision. It sounded pained. Protocol was crystal clear. Upon encountering Vorak military personnel outside designated interaction zones, humans were to activate their emergency beacons and retreat immediately to the nearest colony outpost. Any deviation was punishable by sanctions that could extend to the entire colony. Elena's hand hovered over the beacon at her belt. The smart choice, the only choice, was to follow procedure. Another roar echoed across the landscape, weaker this time, followed by a guttural sound that translated across species boundaries. Whatever Vorak was out there, it was suffering. "This is incredibly stupid," Elena muttered. Reaching instead for her field medical kit, she moved toward the sound, each step carrying her further from safety and deeper into a situation that could easily prove fatal, both for herself and, potentially, for Colony 23 Delta. The Vorak warrior lay in a shallow ravine, partially obscured by the purple-leaved vegetation that grew along the watercourse. From Elena's position at the ridge, she could see the extent of the injuries, a massive gash across the torso, exposing the iridescent purple viscera that characterized Voratian biology. The warrior's normally emerald scales had dulled to an ashen gray around the wound, a sign of critical system failure in their species. Elena had never been this close to a Vorak outside of official functions, where the warriors maintained rigid formality. This one was enormous, easily 12 feet long from snout to tail tip, with the characteristic bony ridge that identified it as a member of the elite Krex Thula bloodline. Its ceremonial armor lay in pieces nearby, suggesting it had been ambushed while on some solitary mission. The creature's eyes, vertical pupils set in amber irises, locked onto Elena as she descended the slope. Its massive jaws parted, revealing rows of serrated teeth. A warning hiss emerged, but the sound faltered, undermined by weakness. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elena said softly, knowing the Vorak's translator implant would convert her words. "I'm a xenobiologist. I can help." The warrior's clawed hand moved toward the disruptor pistol, still holstered at its side. Elena froze, fully aware that even in its weakened state, the Vorak could vaporize her with a single shot. "You're bleeding out," she continued, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That wound has punctured your secondary circulation system. Without treatment, you have maybe 20 minutes before total system collapse." The hand hesitated. "I understand your pride," Elena said, inching forward. "But I also understand your physiology. Please, let me help you." The Vorak's jaw worked silently for a moment before it responded, its translated voice emerging as a harsh electronic rasp. "Why would prey? Assist predator." Elena set down her medical kit within reach of the warrior. "Because some principles transcend evolutionary categories," she replied, snapping open the case. "Now, this is going to hurt, but I need to stabilize that wound before attempting to move you." To her surprise, the Vorak warrior shifted its massive body to provide better access to the injury. Elena worked methodically, applying pressure to stem the flow of purple blood while preparing a synthetic binding agent designed to work with Voratian tissue. Her hands moved with practiced precision despite the surreal nature of the situation. A human treating a Vorak warrior, the equivalent of a field mouse performing surgery on a tiger. "The binding agent will slow the bleeding and promote cellular regeneration," she explained as she worked, partly to distract the warrior from the pain and partly to fill the terrifying silence. "Your species has remarkable healing capabilities, but this wound is severe. You'll need proper medical attention from your own kind." The warrior remained silent, its breathing labored. Elena continued her ministrations, applying antibacterial sealants and reinforcing damaged tissue connections. The procedure was rudimentary, limited by her field supplies, but it might buy enough time for the warrior to reach proper medical facilities. "What is your designation?" the Vorak finally asked, its translator rendering the question with unexpected gentleness. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist, Colony 23 Delta," she answered, not looking up from her work. "You risk punishment," the warrior observed. "Execution possible." Elena's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Yes, but I couldn't just leave you to die." "Why?" The simple question carried unexpected weight. Elena considered her answer carefully as she finished applying the last of the synthetic skin. "Because suffering deserves compassion," she finally said. "Regardless of species, rank, or circumstance, pain is universal." The Vorak's amber eyes studied her with an intensity that made Elena profoundly uncomfortable. She busied herself with repacking her medical supplies, aware that she had violated numerous regulations and potentially endangered her entire colony. "I've done what I can," she said, closing her kit. "The wound is stabilized, but you need proper medical attention. Can you signal for extraction? The warrior's clawed hand moved slowly to a device attached to its armor fragment. Already. Done. Elena nodded, rising to her feet. Then I should go. Your rescue team won't appreciate finding a human here. Wait. The command, though weakened, retained the authority inherent to the Varation ruling class. Your name. Again. Elena Vasquez. The warrior's massive head inclined slightly. I am Commander Vex Corral, Krexthula bloodline. Its breathing had grown more labored. Remember. This day. Elena backed away, uncertainty mingling with concern. Try to remain still. Movement will reopen the wound. As she retreated up the ravine slope, Elena glanced back once to see the Vorik warrior watching her, its amber eyes unblinking. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. She had just placed herself, and potentially her entire colony, in terrible danger. By the time Elena returned to Colony Central, the surveillance drones were already waiting. They hovered silently outside her residence, sleek, metallic constructs with the distinctive red sigil of Varatian military intelligence emblazoned on their carapaces. Her heart sank. Word had traveled faster than she had anticipated. Administrator Davies was waiting in her living quarters, his face ashen. "What have you done, Vasquez?" he demanded, dispensing with formal titles, a sign of his distress. "A patrolling team commander is demanding your immediate surrender to Varation custody." Elena set down her field kit with deliberate calm. "I provided emergency medical treatment to an injured Vorak warrior." Davies stared at her as though she'd announced plans to detonate the colony's fusion core. "You?" "What? Do you understand what you've done? The protocols exist for a reason. Non-sanctioned interaction with Varatian military personnel is a capital offense." "Yes, I'm aware," Elena interrupted, sinking into a chair. The adrenaline that had sustained her was ebbing, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. "It was a member of the Krexthula bloodline. Vex Corral, if possible." Davies' face grew even paler. "The elite guard. You interfered with one of their elite." He ran a trembling hand through his thinning hair. "The entire colony could be sanctioned for this. Thousands of lives. Vasquez." "I couldn't just let it die," Elena said softly. Before Davies could respond, a harsh electronic tone filled the room, the unmistakable signal of an incoming transmission from Varation High Command. Both humans froze, staring at the communication panel as it activated automatically. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of High Commander Thex Morvac. Even through the projection, the Varation leader's presence dominated the room, 14 feet of armored reptilian authority, with the ceremonial scarification that marked veterans of 100 successful conquests etched into the scales of his face. Human designation, Elena Vasquez. Morvac's translated voice filled the room, each syllable precisely articulated. "You will account for your actions regarding Commander Vex Corral of the Krexthula bloodline. Explanation is required immediately." Elena rose from her chair, squaring her shoulders as she faced the projection. Davies had retreated to the farthest corner of the room, as though physical distance might somehow exclude him from the conversation. "High Commander," Elena began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I encountered Commander Vex Corral, severely wounded in the Crimson Flats region. His injuries were life-threatening. A major laceration across the thoracic cavity with damage to the secondary circulatory system. I made the decision to provide emergency medical treatment, using standard field techniques appropriate for Varation physiology." Morvac's vertical pupils narrowed to thin slits. You are aware of the penalties for unauthorized interaction with Varatian military personnel? Yes. High Commander, the standard penalty is execution of the offender and sanctions against the affiliated colony. A low hiss emanated from the Varatian leader, a sound the translator didn't attempt to interpret. And yet you proceeded. Elena met the reptilian gaze directly. I did. The alternative was to leave a wounded warrior to die when I possessed the knowledge and supplies to potentially save him. An interesting choice. Morvac's massive head tilted slightly. Records indicate you activated no emergency beacon. You sought no authorization. You acted unilaterally. There wasn't time for procedural compliance. High Commander. Commander Vexcaral would have died while I waited for authorization. For several excruciating seconds, Morvac remained silent, his unblinking gaze fixed on Elena. When he finally spoke, his words were not what she expected. Commander Vexcaral survived long enough to reach medical facilities. Before losing consciousness, he invoked the ancient protocol of Krivosh Thal, honor beyond strength. Elena glanced uncertainly at Davies, who appeared equally confused. I'm not familiar with that protocol, High Commander, she admitted. Something approximating amusement flickered across Morvac's reptilian features. It would be surprising if you were human. The protocol has not been invoked in 7 generations of Varatian rule. It stems from our pre-imperial era, when the warrior code valued more than mere victory. The holographic image shifted as Morvac leaned closer, filling more of the projection field. Commander Vexcaral's final conscious act was to place you and all of your genetic line under the protection of the Krex Thula bloodline. By our most ancient laws, this protection cannot be revoked or overruled, not even by me. Elena struggled to process this information. Protection? I don't understand. It means, Dr. Elena Vasquez, that 4,000 of our most elite warriors are now bound by sacred oath to defend your life with their own. Any threat to you becomes a threat to the entire Krex Thula bloodline. Morvac's jaw clicked in what might have been irritation. It is unprecedented in our dealings with non-Varatian species. Davies made a strangled sound from his corner. Elena remained rooted in place, unable to fully comprehend the implications. Why would he do this? She finally asked. Commander Vexcaral's personal log, transmitted before he lost consciousness, indicated that you spoke to him of principles that transcend evolutionary categories. You mentioned compassion for suffering, regardless of species. Morvac's tone suggested he was reciting alien concepts. These ideas align with certain forgotten aspects of pre-imperial Varatian philosophy. Your actions resonated. The holographic image flickered as Morvac straightened to his full height. Effective immediately, Varatian battlecruiser Thanatos will establish protective orbit around Colony 23 Delta. A personal guard detail will be assigned to you. Dr. Vasquez, the Krex Thula do not take their honor obligations lightly. Before Elena could formulate a response, the communication terminated, leaving the room in stunned silence. Davies stared at her, as though she'd spontaneously grown a second head. What have you done? He whispered, the question now carrying entirely different implications. Elena sank back into her chair. I think, she said slowly, I just changed the rules of the game. The following days brought radical changes to Colony 23 Delta. The Varatian battlecruiser, Thanatos, maintained a visible presence in low orbit, its massive silhouette occasionally casting shadows across the settlement when it passed between Kepler 42b and its sun. More disconcerting were the Varatian guards now stationed throughout the colony, towering, heavily armed warriors who maintained a respectful distance from the human population but whose presence could not be ignored. Elena's personal guard detail consisted of 2 elite Krex Thula warriors, Sentinel Krex and Sentinel Vaxar, who followed her everywhere, maintaining a 20-meter perimeter that quickly became known as the Vasquez Bubble. Colonial residents gave this space a wide berth, eyeing the Varatian guards with a mixture of fear and fascination. "This is completely unnecessary," Elena insisted during her fourth attempt to dismiss the guards. "I don't need protection within the colony." Sentinel Krex's translator rendered his response with inflectionless precision. "The honor debt requires comprehensive protection. Exceptions cannot be made." Elena sighed, resigning herself to the new reality. The research lab where she processed her biological samples had been redesigned to accommodate her Voratian shadows, with reinforced furniture and widened doorways. Her colleagues maintained a nervous distance, their research conversations now conducted via messaging systems rather than in person. Administrator Davies had adapted to the situation with surprising flexibility. Recognizing the potential diplomatic advantages of having a colony member under Voratian protection, trade negotiations that had stalled for months suddenly progressed with remarkable speed. Supply shipments arrived with unprecedented regularity. Colonial infrastructure requests received immediate approval. "Don't look so miserable, Vasquez," Davies remarked during their weekly administrative meeting. "You've accidentally triggered the most significant improvement in human-Voratian relations since first contact. The lunar colonies are sending a diplomatic delegation next month to see if they can replicate whatever magic you worked." Elena rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of unwanted celebrity. "There was no magic. I just treated a wounded creature with basic decency." "Well, your basic decency has caught the attention of every major power in 3 galaxies. The Zephians are furious. They've spent centuries trying to improve their standing with the Vorak through military alliances. The Crystalline Collective has filed formal protests, claiming preferential treatment. Even the High Gemini has requested clarification on what they're calling the Vasquez Protocols." Davies shook his head in disbelief. "You've become an interstellar incident, Doctor." "Wonderful," Elena muttered. "All I wanted was to study alien beetles." "Speaking of which," Davies continued, "High Command has approved your request for expanded research permissions. You're now authorized to access any region on Kepler-42b for your studies. Apparently, the Krex Thula consider scientific inquiry an extension of your personal freedom." This, at least, was welcome news. Elena had submitted the request more as a test of her new status than with any real expectation of approval. "When can I begin?" "Immediately, though I hardly need to remind you that your entourage will accompany you." Elena nodded, already planning her next expedition. If she was stuck with Voratian shadows, she might as well use the opportunity to explore previously restricted areas of the planet. There were rumors of bioluminescent forests beyond the eastern ridges that no human had been permitted to study. "One more thing," Davies added, his expression growing serious. "You've been summoned to appear before the Interspecies Regulatory Commission next week. They want a full accounting of the incident with Commander Vexcaral." "Is this a formal inquiry? Am I being charged with something?" Davies shook his head. "Quite the opposite. With the Krex Thula backing you, no one would dare suggest punitive measures. This is more political theater. Everyone wants to understand what happened and how they might benefit from it." Elena left the meeting with a growing sense of unease. She had never sought political influence or diplomatic significance. Her actions had been driven by compassion rather than calculation. The notion that various species now viewed her as some kind of strategic asset was profoundly uncomfortable. As she crossed the central plaza toward her laboratory, Elena noticed the subtle changes in how colonists responded to her presence. Some nodded respectfully, others quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. The invisible barrier created by her Voratian guards had transformed her into something other, neither fully part of the human community nor aligned with the Voratian hierarchy. Sentinel Krex moved slightly closer as they approached a crowded market section. Caution is advised. Multiple non-registered lifeforms detected. Elena followed his gaze to a group of traders, wearing the distinctive copper-hued garments of the Zephian Mercantile Guild. Their elongated, avian features betrayed no emotion as they observed her passing. But their posture suggested tension. "They're just traders," Elena said quietly. "Not threats. Surveillance indicates communications regarding your protection status. Interest has been noted from 17 distinct political entities." Krex's massive form shifted to create a more effective barrier between Elena and the Zephian delegation. Motivations unknown. The implications settled like a weight on Elena's shoulders. Her impulsive act of compassion had rippled outward, creating consequences she had never anticipated. She was no longer simply a xenobiologist. She had become a symbol, a diplomatic anomaly, a potential lever in the complex power dynamics of interstellar politics. That night, Elena sat on the small balcony of her quarters, gazing up at the unfamiliar constellations of Kepler's night sky. The silhouette of the Thanatos was visible against the stars, a dark shape occluding the light of distant suns. Her guards maintained their vigil, positioned at strategic points around the building's perimeter. "What have I started?" she whispered to the empty air. 3 months after the incident with Commander Vexcaral, Elena had established a new routine. Her research expeditions continued, now with unprecedented access to Kepler, 42b's most ecologically significant regions. The presence of her Voratian guards had become almost unremarkable, a constant that she had learned to accommodate. Like the planet's higher gravity or the perpetual scent of mineral-rich soil that permeated the colony, the Interspecies Regulatory Commission hearing had proven less intimidating than anticipated. With Sentinels Krex and Vaxar flanking her, Elena had delivered a straightforward account of her encounter with the wounded warrior. The Commission representatives, a diverse assembly of species from across the known galaxies, had listened with varying degrees of skepticism and interest. "And you maintain that your actions were motivated solely by medical ethics?" the crystalline representative had asked, light refracting through its prismatic form in patterns that indicated doubt. "With no strategic considerations?" "I am a doctor before I'm a colonial subject," Elena had replied simply. "I saw a wounded being and acted accordingly." The hegemony delegate, a gelatinous entity that communicated through patterns of bioluminescence, had pulsed rapidly. "Yet you must have recognized the potential consequences of interfering with a Voratian military officer." "I recognize the potential consequences of doing nothing," Elena had countered. "Those seemed worse." In the end, the Commission had issued a bland statement acknowledging the unique circumstances of the situation and recommending continued observation of evolving diplomatic implications. Bureaucratic nonsense that changed nothing. More significant was the gradual shift in Voratian behavior toward human colonies throughout their territories. Reports filtered in from distant settlements. Inspection protocols relaxed. Resource allocations increased. Punitive measures for minor infractions reduced. Nothing officially acknowledged, but a subtle rebalancing of the relationship between dominant and subordinate species. "You've become something of a legend among the subjugated worlds," Craig Valor, commander of the Colonial Security Team, informed her during one of her research expeditions. Unlike most colonists, Valor seemed unintimidated by her Voratian entourage, matching their professional detachment with his own military bearing. "I'm not interested in being a legend," Elena replied, carefully preserving a specimen of the prismatic fungus she'd discovered growing along the banks of the Kithra River. "I'm interested in cataloging this ecosystem before it's irreparably altered by colonial development." Valor shrugged. the gesture made awkward by his environmental suit. Legends rarely get to choose their status. The story has taken on a life of its own. The human who whispered to a dying apex predator and won the protection of an entire warrior bloodline. It's practically mythological. Elena sealed the specimen container with more force than necessary. Mythology won't help these organisms survive industrial expansion. Maybe not, Valor conceded. But it might help humanity survive Voratian dominion with our dignity intact. You've changed the narrative, Dr. Vasquez. For the first time in 3 centuries of occupation, we're not just livestock managers. We're beings worthy of respect. She glanced up, surprised by the fervor in his voice. Valor had always struck her as the quintessential pragmatist, focused on security protocols and tactical considerations rather than philosophical implications. I didn't set out to change any narratives, she said finally. I just couldn't walk away from suffering when I had the means to help. Valor's expression softened. And that's precisely why the story resonates. It's authentic. No political calculation. No strategic maneuvering. Just basic compassion transcending species boundaries. He gestured toward the Voratian sentinels, maintaining their watchful perimeter. Even they understand the power in that. As if on cue, Sentinel Vaxar approached, his massive form moving with surprising grace across the uneven terrain. Dr. Vasquez, priority communication incoming from Voratian High Command. High Commander Thex Morvac requests direct dialogue. Elena exchanged a startled glance with Valor before activating her communication implant. The holographic interface materialized before her, rendering Thex Morvac's imposing visage in translucent blue light. Even through the projection, his presence commanded attention. Dr. Vasquez. The High Commander's translated voice filled the clearing. Your presence is requested aboard the command vessel, Imperator, for direct consultation. Elena blinked in surprise. Humans were never invited aboard Voratian command ships. May I ask the nature of this consultation? High Commander? Recent events have necessitated a re-evaluation of certain imperial policies, Morvac replied, each word precisely measured. Your unique perspective may prove valuable in this process. My perspective on what exactly? Morvac's vertical pupils contracted slightly, a sign of focus in Voratian body language. On the concept you designated as compassion, on principles that transcend evolutionary categories. These ideas have prompted considerable discourse within the imperial conclave. Elena struggled to mask her astonishment. The imperial conclave was the highest governing body of the Voratian Empire, comprised of the eldest and most decorated warriors from each major bloodline. The notion that they were discussing her philosophical positions seemed almost absurd. I'm honored by the request. High Commander, when would this consultation take place? The Imperator will achieve orbital synchronization with your position in approximately 17 planetary rotations. Appropriate accommodations will be prepared for your biological requirements. Before Elena could respond further, Morvac continued. Additionally, Commander Vexcaral has completed regenerative therapy and requested permission to join the consultation. Permission has been granted. The news that Vexcaral had survived his injuries flooded Elena with unexpected relief. I'm pleased to hear of the Commander's recovery. Something approximating amusement flickered across Morvac's reptilian features. His recovery has been accompanied by what our medical practitioners describe as ideological evolution. Your influence appears to extend beyond physiological intervention. The communication terminated with characteristic Voratian abruptness, leaving Elena standing in stunned silence. Valor whistled softly. An invitation to the Imperator, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. No human has ever set foot on their command vessel, I'm aware, Elena replied faintly. This goes beyond diplomatic anomaly. Doctor, this is historic. Elena turned to her Voratian guards, who had maintained their typical stoic silence throughout the exchange. Is this unusual from your perspective as well? Sentinel Krex inclined his massive head slightly. The High Commander does not typically seek counsel from non-Voratian entities. This request indicates significant paradigmatic reassessment. Great, Elena muttered. No pressure. The 17 days before the Imperator's arrival passed with agonizing slowness. Elena attempted to maintain her research schedule, but concentration proved elusive. The implications of the upcoming consultation weighed heavily on her mind. What could the highest echelons of Voratian leadership possibly want from her? And what had Morvac meant by ideological evolution regarding Commander Vexcaral? News of the impending meeting spread throughout Colony 23 Delta, despite official attempts to maintain confidentiality. Elena found herself the subject of intense scrutiny, with colonists alternatively treating her with newfound deference or barely concealed resentment. The burden of unexpected importance settled uncomfortably on her shoulders. Administrator Davies summoned her to a preparatory briefing 3 days before the Imperator's scheduled arrival. The colonial administrative offices had been transformed into a makeshift strategic center, with representatives from Earth's Central Diplomatic Corps in attendance via holographic projection. Dr. Vasquez, began the lead diplomat, a stern-faced woman whose identification tag read Ambassador Chen. We need to establish clear parameters for your interaction with the Voratian leadership. This opportunity is unprecedented, and proper strategic positioning is essential. Elena frowned. I was invited to share my perspective on compassion, not to negotiate territorial concessions. Everything is negotiation when dealing with the Vorak, the ambassador countered. Each word carries potential implications for human colonies throughout their territories. We've prepared a comprehensive brief on acceptable discussion topics and recommended positioning on key issues. With all due respect, Ambassador, I think that approach misses the point entirely, Elena said, pushing away the data tablet that had been placed before her. The Vorak didn't extend this invitation because they want a carefully scripted diplomatic performance. They're interested in the authenticity of the interaction with Commander Vexcaral. Davies cleared his throat nervously. Dr. Vasquez, perhaps it would be wise to at least review the briefing materials. No, Elena said firmly. I won't turn this into a political maneuver. That would undermine the very principle that apparently interested them in the first place. The ambassador's holographic image flickered as she leaned forward. Doctor, you may not appreciate the significance of your position. Humanity has spent centuries trying to improve our standing within the Voratian hierarchy. This could be a pivotal moment in that effort. Or it could be a simple conversation about ethical principles that transcend species boundaries. Elena countered. I believe that's what they're actually interested in. The debate continued for hours, with the diplomatic corps attempting to convince Elena of the necessity for strategic preparation, while she steadfastly maintained her commitment to authenticity. In the end, a compromise was reached. Elena would review basic information about Voratian cultural protocols to avoid inadvertent offense, but would otherwise speak from her own ethical framework without diplomatic coaching. As the contentious meeting concluded, Elena found herself alone with Davies in the administrative chamber. The administrator studied her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. You really believe this isn't political, don't you? He finally asked. Elena sighed, fatigue evident in her posture. I believe that treating it as primarily political would betray the very principle that created this situation. Yes, there will be political implications. I'm not naive. But the foundation has to be genuine. Davies nodded slowly. It's a risky approach, But then, conventional diplomatic strategies haven't exactly transformed our relationship with the Vorak over the past 3 centuries. He offered a tired smile. Perhaps authenticity deserves its chance. The day of the Imperator's arrival dawned with a sense of surreal anticipation. The massive Voratian command vessel entered orbit with characteristic precision, its silhouette dwarfing the battlecruiser Thanatos that had maintained protective watch over the colony. At twice the length of Earth's largest capital ships, the Imperator represented the pinnacle of Voratian military engineering, a mobile fortress capable of subjugating entire planetary systems. Elena stood on the designated reception platform, dressed in her standard research attire, rather than the formal diplomatic ensemble that had been suggested. Sentinels Krex and Vaxar flanked her as always, their posture subtly more rigid in the presence of the command vessel. The transport shuttle descended with surprising delicacy for such a massive craft, settling onto the platform with minimal atmospheric disturbance. Its hull bore the elaborate insignia of the Imperial Conclave, a symbol rarely seen in colonial territories. As the access ramp extended, Elena squared her shoulders and took a steadying breath. Whatever happened next would likely have implications far beyond her personal experience. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, momentarily constricting her breathing. The first figure to emerge was Commander Vexcaral. Elena recognized him immediately, despite the ceremonial armor that now encased his massive form. The Voratian warrior moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his species, showing no evidence of the grievous wound that had nearly claimed his life. Behind him came a delegation of Voratian officials, their elaborate armor signifying various ranks and bloodlines. Vexcaral approached Elena directly, towering over her human frame. For a moment, he simply observed her, amber eyes unblinking. Then, to the visible shock of the colonial representatives gathered at a respectful distance, the Voratian warrior performed a ceremonial gesture, placing one clawed hand across his chest in the traditional salute, reserved for equals in rank. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," his translator rendered in that familiar electronic rasp. "You honor us with your presence." Elena inclined her head, mirroring the gesture as best her human physiology allowed. "Commander Vexcaral, I'm pleased to see you fully recovered." Something approximating amusement flickered across the Voratian's features. "Thanks to your intervention, the medical practitioners were impressed by your field techniques." One of the Voratian officials stepped forward, the elaborate crest on his armor marking him as a high-ranking member of the Imperial Diplomatic Corps. "Dr. Vasquez, High Commander Thex Morvac awaits your presence aboard the Imperator, if you will accompany us." Elena nodded, moving toward the transport shuttle with her Voratian guards still in formation around her. As she boarded the vessel, she caught a glimpse of Administrator Davies watching from the observation platform, his expression a complex mixture of hope and apprehension. The journey to the Imperator took less than 15 minutes, though it felt to Elena like crossing a threshold that could never be uncrossed. The shuttle docked with precision in one of the command vessel's massive hangar bays, revealing a space large enough to accommodate dozens of similar craft. Voratian warriors stood in perfect formation, their disciplined stillness creating an atmosphere of controlled power. Vexcaral led the procession through the vessel's corridors, massive passageways designed for Voratian physiology, making Elena feel even smaller than usual in their presence. The architecture emphasized functionality over aesthetics, with every element serving a clear purpose. Yet there was undeniable grandeur in the scale and precision of the engineering. They arrived at what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, its high ceiling adorned with stylized representations of Voratian military victories, spanning centuries of conquest. At the chamber's center stood High Commander Thex Morvac, his imposing figure even more formidable in person than through holographic projection. Dr. Elena Vasquez. Morvac's translated voice filled the chamber as Elena approached. You stand in a place no human has entered before, the command center of the Imperial fleet. Elena maintained steady eye contact despite the intimidating difference in stature. I am honored by the invitation, High Commander. Morvac gestured toward an arrangement of seating platforms, some obviously modified to accommodate human proportions. Please, we have much to discuss. As Elena took her seat, she noticed additional Varation officials entering the chamber, elder warriors bearing the distinctive scarification of the Imperial Conclave. The gathering was larger and more significant than she had anticipated. You are curious about the purpose of this consultation, Morvac stated, settling his massive form onto a platform directly opposite Elena. Yes, she admitted. I'm still not certain what perspective I can offer that would be valuable to the Imperial Conclave. Morvac's vertical pupils contracted slightly. Your interaction with Commander Vexcaral has precipitated what might be described as a philosophical renaissance within certain segments of Varation society. The concept you referenced, compassion as a strength rather than weakness, has resonated with ancient traditions, long suppressed during our imperial expansion. Elena glanced at Vexcaral, who had taken a position to Morvac's right. The commander inclined his head slightly, confirming the High Commander's words. My survival, Vexcaral added, became a point of significant discourse. The fact that an ostensibly weaker species would risk punishment to preserve the life of a predator species challenged certain assumptions about the nature of strength and dominance. One of the Elder Conclave members stepped forward, the elaborate patterning on his scales marking him as a historian of considerable status. For 7 generations, the Varation Empire has operated under the principle that strength alone determines worth. Yet our most ancient texts speak of Krivash Thal, honor beyond strength, as the highest virtue. Your actions embody this forgotten principle. Elena considered her response carefully. In human history, we've often confused domination with strength. Our most destructive periods came when we valued power over compassion. Our greatest achievements emerged when we recognized that true strength often lies in restraint, in protection rather than subjugation. An interesting perspective, Morvac said, and one that aligns with certain philosophical traditions that predate our imperial expansion. Before the Vorak conquered the 3 galaxies, our society valued the warrior who could show mercy as much as the warrior who could destroy enemies. The historical implications stunned Elena. You're suggesting that the Varation Empire once operated on different principles? The empire was built on conquest, another Conclave elder interjected. But its earliest foundations included concepts of honorable governance, of strength, expressed through protection rather than mere domination. Morvac rose from his seat, his massive form dominating the chamber as he began to pace. Dr. Vasquez, the Varation Empire stands at a crossroads. 3 centuries of uncontested dominance have calcified certain aspects of our governance. Efficiency has replaced honor in many respects. Your interaction with Commander Vexcaral has catalyzed a re-examination of these principles. Elena struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was being suggested. High Commander, while I'm flattered that my actions have prompted philosophical discourse, I'm still uncertain what you expect from me in this consultation. Morvac stopped his pacing, fixing Elena with his unblinking gaze. We require your perspective on how principles of compassion might be reintegrated into Varation governance without compromising the security and stability of the empire. Your unique position, neither conqueror nor truly conquered, offers insights unavailable to our own philosophers. The request left Elena momentarily speechless. They were asking her, a colonial xenobiologist, to help reshape the philosophical foundations of an empire spanning 3 galaxies. Vexcarol moved closer. His voice lowered, though still audible through the translator. Your words by the riverbank spoke of principles that transcend evolutionary categories. That suffering deserves compassion regardless of species or circumstance. These concepts have power, Dr. Vasquez. Power that might transform an empire if properly understood. Elena looked around the chamber, at the assembled Voratian leadership watching her with evident expectation. The weight of the moment pressed upon her consciousness. The improbable opportunity to influence the most dominant military force in known space toward a more compassionate expression of power. I'm not a diplomat or a philosopher, she began carefully. I'm a scientist who believes that understanding transcends fear, and that compassion strengthens rather than weakens those who practice it. If my perspective can contribute to a more balanced expression of Voratian governance, I'm willing to share it, not as a representative of humanity, but as one sentient being speaking to others about principles that might benefit us all. A low murmur of approval rippled through the assembled conclave members. Morvac's expression remained unreadable, but his next words carried unmistakable significance. Then let us begin a dialogue that may reshape the future of 3 galaxies. The consultation aboard the Imperator extended far beyond Elena's expectations, spanning 3 full days of intensive discussion. What had begun as a philosophical exploration evolved into a comprehensive re-evaluation of Voratian governance principles, with Elena's perspective serving as a catalyst rather than a blueprint. She spoke of Earth's history, of empires that had collapsed under the weight of their own brutality, and others that had thrived through balanced governance. She described the biological foundations of compassion across species, the evolutionary advantages of cooperative systems, and the sustainability of governance models that incorporated ethical restraint. The Voratian leadership listened with surprising receptivity, particularly when Elena framed compassion not as weakness, but as sophisticated strength, the capacity to wield power with precision rather than brute force. Commander Vexcarol proved an unexpected ally, relating his personal experience of receiving compassion from a species his culture had designated as inferior. In that moment of vulnerability, he told the assembled conclave, I witnessed strength that our current paradigm does not account for. Dr. Vasquez risked execution to preserve life, not from fear or obligation, but from principle. There is power in such conviction that our empire would be foolish to dismiss. On the final day, High Commander Morvac presented what he termed a preliminary adjustment to imperial governance protocols. The proposed changes were modest by human standards, but revolutionary within the Voratian context. Reduced punitive measures for minor infractions among subject species, increased autonomy for colonial administrations that demonstrated efficient self-governance, and the establishment of an advisory council comprising representatives from various subject species. These adjustments represent not concession, but evolution, Morvac declared. The true strength of the Voratian Empire lies not merely in our capacity to conquer, but in our ability to govern with wisdom. Krevash Thal, honor beyond strength, shall be reintegrated into our governing philosophy. As the consultation concluded, Elena found herself standing with Commander Vexcarol in one of the Imperator's observation chambers, gazing out at the curvature of Kepler, 42b below. The planet's azure oceans and rust-colored continents formed a stark contrast against the void of space. You understand that this is merely the beginning, Vexcarol said, his translated voice softer than usual. Centuries of imperial expansion cannot be redirected in 3 days of discussion. Elena nodded. Change of this magnitude requires generational commitment, but beginning the process is significant. The protection of the Krex-Thula bloodline remains with you, the commander continued. This is not a diplomatic arrangement that can be revoked with shifting political winds. It is a blood oath that binds 4,000 warriors across 3 galaxies. I'm still not entirely comfortable with having personal guardians, Elena admitted. It creates barriers between me and my colleagues. Something approximating amusement flickered across Vexcarol's reptilian features. Perhaps you might consider the symbolic value of the arrangement. A human scientist protected by Varation warriors, a living embodiment of the new paradigm we seek to establish. Elena hadn't considered this perspective. You're suggesting my discomfort serves a greater purpose. I am suggesting that symbols matter in times of transition. Your actions created this symbol. Perhaps your continued participation can help solidify its meaning. Before Elena could respond, a communication alert sounded. High Commander Morvac's voice filled the chamber. Dr. Vasquez, the transport shuttle is prepared for your return to the colony. However, there is one final matter to address before your departure. Elena exchanged a questioning glance with Vexcarol, who seemed equally surprised by the announcement. They made their way back to the ceremonial chamber, where Morvac and several Conclave elders awaited. The Imperial Conclave has approved an unprecedented proposal, Morvac stated without preamble. You are invited to address the annual gathering of bloodlines on the Varacian homeworld. This assembly includes representatives from every major and minor bloodline across our territories, the most comprehensive gathering of Varacian leadership in the Imperial calendar. Elena stared in astonishment. You want me to address the entire Varacian leadership structure? To speak on the power of compassion as strength, one of the elders elaborated. To share the perspective that initiated this philosophical re-examination. The implications were staggering. Such an address could potentially influence the entire Varacian power structure, accelerating the integration of compassionate governance principles throughout their territories. This is unexpected, Elena managed. Yet appropriate, Vexcarol interjected. The catalyst should witness the reaction. After a moment's consideration, Elena nodded. I would be honored to address the gathering. As she boarded the transport shuttle for her return to Colony 23 Delta, Elena found herself contemplating the improbable journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion beside a Keplerian riverbank. Her decision to help a wounded warrior, made without calculation or strategic consideration, had somehow set in motion changes that might eventually reshape the relationship between humans and Varacians throughout 3 galaxies. Administrator Davies was waiting when the shuttle landed, his expression a mixture of curiosity and relief. Welcome back, Dr. Vasquez. I trust the consultation was productive. Elena smiled, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the intensive 3-day dialogue. More productive than anyone could have anticipated. It seems we've initiated something of a philosophical renaissance within the Varacian power structure. Davies raised an eyebrow. A philosophical renaissance? That sounds suspiciously like progress. Don't get too excited, Elena cautioned as they walked toward the administrative complex. We're talking about potential shifts in an empire that spans 3 galaxies. The time frame for meaningful change will be measured in decades, not days. Still, Davies persisted. Something has changed. The Varacian patrol ships have already modified their interaction protocols with colonial vessels. Less intimidation, more professionalism. And yesterday, we received approval for 3 infrastructure expansion projects that have been pending for months. Elena nodded, unsurprised. These small adjustments aligned with the preliminary changes Morvac had outlined. Consider it a demonstration of intent. The High Commander is signaling the beginning of a new approach. And you helped shape this new approach, Davies asked, unable to hide his amazement. I offered a perspective, Elena corrected. The Vorations themselves are shaping the changes. I simply reminded them of principles they once held before imperial expansion became their primary focus. They reached the administrative complex, where Elena was surprised to find a gathering of colonial officials waiting to greet her. The atmosphere contained an unfamiliar element, hope. "They've been following reports from the Imperator," Davies explained quietly. "Word of the consultation has spread throughout the colonial network. You've become something of a symbol. Dr. Vasquez." Elena sighed, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm a xenobiologist who made a compassionate choice. The symbolism is incidental." "Perhaps," Davies conceded. "But sometimes, Doctor, the most powerful symbols emerge from authentic actions, rather than calculated gestures." 6 months later, Elena stood on the ceremonial platform of the Grand Assembly on Vorak Prime, the ancestral homeworld of the Voratian species. The massive amphitheater stretched before her, filled with thousands of Voratian representatives from every bloodline and territory across their vast empire. The assembly represented the most comprehensive gathering of Voratian leadership in the imperial calendar, a convergence of military, political, and philosophical authority unprecedented in its scope. Sentinel Krex and Sentinel Vaxar maintained their protective positions nearby, though their presence now seemed more ceremonial than necessary. Commander Vexcaral stood to Elena's right, while High Commander Thex Morvac occupied the central position on the elevated platform. Representatives of the Voratian bloodlines, Morvac's voice resonated through the amphitheater. "I present Dr. Elena Vasquez of Earth, Protectorate of the Krex Thula bloodline, and catalyst of the Compassionate Governance Initiative." The formal title had been bestowed during the preparatory meetings leading up to the assembly. Another symbol in the carefully choreographed transformation of imperial philosophy. Elena still found it slightly absurd, but had come to accept the necessity of such designations in Voratian political discourse. As she stepped forward to address the assembly, Elena reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as a simple act of compassion toward a wounded warrior had somehow blossomed into a movement that was gradually reshaping the philosophical foundations of the most powerful empire in known space. The amphitheater fell silent as she began to speak. Her words translated and amplified for the assembled Voratian leadership. "I stand before you not as a representative of humanity, but as one sentient being, addressing others about principles that transcend evolutionary categories," she began, echoing the words she had spoken aboard the Imperator months earlier. "The true measure of an advanced civilization lies not in its capacity to conquer, but in its ability to govern with wisdom and restraint." As her address continued, Elena observed the attentive posture of the assembled warriors, these apex predators who had dominated 3 galaxies through unmatched military prowess. Now considering the proposition that compassion might represent a more sophisticated expression of strength than mere subjugation. Commander Vexcaral had been right. She realized this was indeed just the beginning of a transformation that would require generational commitment to fully realize. But, as she surveyed the gathered Voratian leadership, Elena recognized something she had not anticipated: genuine receptivity to change. The empire, that had conquered through strength alone, was beginning to rediscover the honor that existed beyond strength, the wisdom of balanced governance, the sustainability of compassionate rule, the power of protection rather than mere domination. And it had all begun with a whisper to a dying apex predator on a distant riverbank. When Elena concluded her address, the response was not the thunderous approval typical of human assemblies, but the profound silence of Voratian contemplation, a silence that represented not rejection, but deep consideration. As she stepped back from the central position, High Commander Morvac moved forward to outline the specific governance adjustments that would be implemented across Pharation territories in the coming cycles. Commander Vexcaral leaned slightly closer, his translated voice pitched for her ears alone. "You have given words to concepts many of us had forgotten. The Empire will never be the same." Elena watched as the assembled Veracian leadership listened to Morvac's pronouncements. Announcements that would gradually transform the relationship between the Veracian Empire and the species under its dominion. The changes would be measured and deliberate, evolving over decades rather than days. But the direction was unmistakable, a shift from governance through fear toward governance through respect. "I only hope it changes for the better," she replied quietly. "It already has," Vexcaral assured her. "The whisper by the riverbank has become a voice that even the most hardened warriors cannot ignore." As the assembly concluded, Elena found herself contemplating the power of seemingly small actions. How a moment of compassion could ripple outward to touch distant stars. How a simple ethical choice could challenge the foundations of an interstellar empire. She had never sought political influence or historical significance. She had simply refused to walk away from suffering when she possessed the means to help. Perhaps that, in the end, was the most profound lesson of all. That the truest expression of strength lay not in the capacity to dominate, but in the courage to care. A principle that transcended not only evolutionary categories, but the vast distances between worlds and the artificial boundaries between species. The Veracian Empire still ruled 3 galaxies with unmatched military might. But for the first time in 7 generations, that rule was tempered by the rediscovery of an ancient truth: that there existed honor beyond strength, and that in this honor lay the seeds of a more enduring legacy than conquest alone could ever provide.